Good afternoon, everybody. Chris and I are delighted to spend a little time with you this afternoon talking about zero trust architectures, the ambitious agenda that the Biden administration has set out for all of us. But first, let me give you a quick introduction. I'm Hubban Gawadia. I am the Principal Associate Director for Global Security at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, about an hour east of here. But Chris and I share the Department of Homeland Security. Before I came here, I spent 18 years as a civil servant working out on the East Coast. Chris has actually spent his whole career working in cybersecurity and information security, done a couple of stints in industry, even worked at state government. But we met, again, as I said, at the Department of Homeland Security when Chris was Special Advisor to Deputy Secretary Lute at the time. And he then went on to do some work in programmatic offices on cybersecurity. Did one stint in the White House in the Obama administration. And now he's back as our federal CISO and Deputy Cybersecurity.
Deputy
National Security.
Deputy National Cyber Director.
Yes. There's too many of those words
I
in
do
that.
have 7 different titles, so it's confusing.
It can get that way. But Chris, it's nice to be here with you, and it was really nice to reconnect. And good we can reconnect on a topic where you can teach me a lot and share a lot about the Biden administration, the incredible foundational documents, the executive order. Why don't you start us off at the beginning when you came back into government, and what you saw, what got you going, challenges, how we got here.
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, it's great to. It's been fun to reconnect, in preparation for this, and great to see you all here. Appreciate you. There's a lot of things you can be doing with your time. So, look, I'll do a little bit of storytelling because I think it's more interesting, right? It's kind of the human element of it. I was the CISO on the campaign, so that's my 2020, and I just sort of been closing things down. Transitioning off to take a little bit of a break, and got a pretty quick phone call from the transition team, like, hey, this SolarWinds event is actually quite a big deal. And so I started paying more attention to what was going on. And then I joined the team right away because I was probably going to be coming into the federal CISO job and role. It just made a lot of sense to get a head start, start assessing the impact of the event. And listen, it's like we talk a lot about SolarWinds. We were like, yeah, no, SolarWinds, and you say Colonial Pipeline, and you say all these things, and it's like, yeah, we're tired of that. We get it. But it was actually like quite impactful and scary moment, right? Like, what were we talking about? Digesting that. It's like we're talking about a complete loss of trust of our entire systems and networks and like all federal government on the low side. But still a problem. A lot of sensitive information is transacted there. We're talking about seeing adversaries and sitting on the inboxes of the people who are going after them, watching their communications, their patterns, their techniques to go after them. Because a lot of stuff actually in certain agencies happens on the low side. There's quite a number of sensitive things that happen on unclassified networks, actually. And so that was the first question. It's like, well, how many agencies have actually been impacted by this event? Because you had at least 18,000 that had downloaded the updates, and it was really just a question of how much time and resources the adversary had to go and achieve their goals. And so that was the only constraint on like where and when they'd gone. So like it just to ground you in that, it was a really serious moment. And the nice thing about coming into administration at that type of moment though is you have a ton of opportunity. Yeah. Because people are asking you questions about your mission, the top people. Whereas otherwise they're largely going to be focused on a lot of different priorities walking in the front door. And we had, the top people in the administration just saying, like, well, what are we going to do? What's the plan? And saying, think big, act big. And that was really exciting, actually, right? Because I think that the thing in our space is like every crisis, every incident has to be an opportunity for you. If you're not treating it that way, you're not getting it right. Because we're just going to keep having these incidents, and it can't be for the sake of managing through it and just trying to get to the next one. Like if we're not using those to get the culture change that we need to be able to have less of them, then we've got to be thinking that way. And like I really was happy just like how much we got to do that.
Yes, it's really interesting you say that because I think back to what we were doing at the lab at about that time, and SolarWinds happen, and certainly for us in the National Laboratory System, we are constantly being pinged, right? So at Livermore, in any given month, our cybersecurity team deals with 10,000 attacks. That's a constant pinging. So we rallied around too. We were like, okay, we're doing all this research. We're developing all these tools. Do we actually have a concerted plan if we had to turn them over quickly into operations? So I think we all felt that sense of urgency. And you kind of see it reflected in the Zero Trust strategy document. You see it in some of the timelines stipulated in the EO and the strategy document. So that actually caught my eye when I was going through them.
For sure, the EO 14028, the cyber EO that we put out in May of 2021, it was pretty aggressive on a lot of fronts. It took on foundational things which will take years to achieve, things like changing federal acquisition rules and like getting all of the right clauses for all of our vendor partners into contracts. I mean, that's just that's a long tail because it takes a little while to get that right, and it's so binding you can't be wrong. And so, we took off foundational layer things, and we also said, but we're going to focus on a couple of key controls, right? We really heavy focus on MFA and encryption, for example. But in that middle layer, the kind of main takeaway was, and what we're doing, our current approach to security, period, is just not working. And it just kept bearing out in the time after the initial drafts of the EO, it being published, the Zero Trust strategy being published, all the supply chain attacks that we're all facing, that you're all dealing with, the Log4j event, all of this just sort of points towards, if you don't have like a Zero Trust principles architecture approach, like I don't know how you can manage through these events. You're just going to keep being victim, and you have too many holes, too many ways in. And so, really, again, like the Zero Trust approach is just about starting with the sort of not trusting, building trust, and getting assurance is all we're talking about. It's like not trusting anything. It's like, how do you know that computer, that device, that human is who they say they are, and or should be. And so but it's hard because it's a complete re-architecture across all these different pillars, and it's a completely different way of working. And that can be pretty scary, right? To make change, because you're going to potentially break some of your applications, and those applications may be delivering critical services to hundreds of thousands of citizens, residents, right? So it's like, it is that tension, but I think we've been finding the balance,
Yeah, no. So I was just thinking when you said how much you have to touch and reach. Across the federal government itself, it's quite a lot of systems, quite a lot of computers, quite a lot of agencies you have to work with, right? So over 100 agencies.
Depending on how you count them.
Yeah.
I mean, we generally say there's just over 100 federal agencies, but if you want to unpack that, we have the big CFO Act agencies. There's 24. But just look at Homeland Security. There's 8 operating components inside DHS, right? When we say DHS as an agency, inside that is FEMA and TSA and
Coast
Customs
Guard.
and Coast Guard. These are massive organizations with 50,000 people at times, right? So inside of each agency, you have all these varying levels of resources, capability in different spots. And so to that point, when we wrote the Zero Trust strategy, we sort of split down the middle of giving. There's a 3-year action plan, and we gave some specific dates. I think it's an important lesson for you all, if you are in an enterprise job and you're trying to move a lot of organizations or a large corporation or something forward. We had to set some targets for things that we felt like everybody should be achieving by 1 year, for example, right? Like changing their password policies. But then in a lot of other places, we wanted to meet everyone where they were and give them some flexibility within the 3 years to work on the actions on their timeline. Because if someone was already down 1 year into a procurement and about to implement something, we didn't want to reprioritize them unintentionally to do some different thing, right? There's so much work to be done. We instead did the approach of having each agency do an implementation plan, which we validated and approved, so that we could hold them to account to the timelines that they set, and we had something to do oversight and governance with. And That's a lot more work, which is why generally the federal way is like everybody do X thing by Y date, because it's just a lot easier to do data metricing and governance of that. But for something this complex, it doesn't work, right? You're just breaking too much unintentionally of like a good thing if you can't find a way to be more flexible. So that's what we did, and it's worked pretty well.
So those are some pretty significant gains, and I think I read somewhere about $5.5 billion had already been invested in this work. So can you check off some achievements for us that we can build on, Chris?
Totally. Let's even start there. Like how are we able to say that? Like, because we're not making that number up. And it's because we have strategy-based budgeting right now for Zero Trust, and it's because we're a couple of years in.
Yeah.
And so we can tag a number because we're doing data calls, and so all of the services, tool buys, hiring, PMOs being stood up, we're tagging all of that to different pillars of the Zero Trust strategy and the capability maturity model that sits below it. And we're saying like this is like X amount of investment in implementing the Biden administration's Zero Trust strategy and the identity cone. This agency is spending X this year, or at least their request is for that. And so if we're seeing that they're let's go through the benefits of that. If we're seeing that they are not investing in those things, and they're actually, it looks like the request is really just all these activities that they wanted to do. Okay, we can call that out. We can have those conversations and realign it. And then also you can just map and roll that all up so that you can have a number. And look, I mean, why is that important? Because if you're trying to influence budget folks inside your organization, justify spend, look, what are the main questions they're asking? Just generally, it's like, okay, how do you know that's the right investment? And like, how do you know that you're spending on it? And is it getting to the outcomes?
Prioritized right? Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't know. We wrote a Zero Trust strategy with the public, and we had some of the best minds in the country provide feedback. We listened to it. We wrote it into the plan, and we felt like, at least in 2022 in January when we issued it, that we had the best plan that we were going to be able to come up with at least to do this. And we kept it to 3 years, knowing that we were going to learn a lot and we were going to need to change it.
Yeah.
And so we were able to start like really confidently answering those questions back when we were getting challenged. And that's a pretty good shutdown answer of like, I don't know, it's like the entire nation wrote it, so I don't know.
It does help.
What we got.
It does help a lot. I have to confess, so I come from the nuclear threat reduction world, and as I was going through this Zero Trust journey with you, the parallels were stark for me, Chris. I mean, there's this notion of, everybody thinks about trust but verify in our world, but it's not really trust but verify. It's monitor, detect, verify, and then you can trust, right? And so it felt a lot parallel, and you're right. It takes a lot when everybody decides to jump on board with that concept. It does take a lot to move that rudder. What are some of the challenges you've faced in trying to get things lined up with what, at least for somebody who's not a cyber expert, it seems pretty logical to want to go this way based on where we see the future going?
For sure, but and like all the stuff we're talking about is hard, right? So we mapped to the Zero Trust capability maturity models that CISA and NSA had built, and just picked things inside of these cones. And so we just look at the data pillar. I mean, come on, that's like a long pole in the tent, I'm sure, for a lot of you, like determining where all your sensitive data is, and then tagging it, and then ensuring it's being appropriately handled. I mean, that's actually quite a cultural shock moment to an organization. People are like, well, I don't have data over there. It's like, you do.
Yeah.
It's just like here's evidence. I'm so sorry you didn't think you did, but that happened. Yeah, and people react to that. So these are not technology problems mostly. They're really often just like the people, process, culture journey, culture change, discovery moments, and so that's a good one where it was even in devices, know all of your assets and have all that inventory, so that you can ensure that you're detecting and responding to any event that occurs in the devices. Sounds nice. Hey, raise your hand if all of you have done that for every IoT device touching your network. So it's in some sense, you have to set this very pure goal for your Zero Trust journey implementation, and then set these benchmarks towards progress. That was our main learning for this, because a lot of people say, well, your zero trust strategy doesn't define like a pure implementation of zero trust. It's like we know, we opened with that. We said that just to make sure everybody knew that we weren't trying to.
It's not flip a switch.
No, we're trying to take our problem set, which is a whole bunch of legacy IT. I mean, you got agencies that have been around for hundreds of years. Like, how old do you think some of this tech is? And like a lot of it for us is getting people ready and having them do the activities that are necessary precursors to making any progress anywhere. And we just try to knock over a bunch of barriers in the meantime with like finally just getting towards phishing resistant MFA everywhere and ensuring that we were getting to our high value assets, something that we categorize. But if you don't have categorization of your high value assets, your crown jewels, then you can't even do that. So it's just like you go through it and it's like everything, there's all these precursor stuff that you end up needing to instruct agencies to do.
So it sounds a bit like, and from where I sit again, it's this future where technological change is coming at us at an incredibly rapid pace, right? And everything is more and more and more connected. So it feels like it is sort of a collective defense that we have to start thinking through, and each of us do our parts in it. So what is next for Zero Trust looking through your lenses as the CISO? Where would you have us focus our minds?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, there's a few things to that. I'll separate out the collective defense question and then like the sort of, because I think I want to answer them a little bit differently.
Sure.
But the very first thing is like we're really trying to ensure that we understand where we are on our Zero Trust journey. We have a number of metrics that we use. I call them like risk proxies. I've already mentioned a couple. Mm-hmm. Like we are measuring, phishing resistant MFA implementation. And again, we're carving it out in all sorts of ways to get granular on where we're at with our high value assets and things like that. And we're doing it on a system basis. I think that's really important because you may be measuring progress of your MFA implementation on a user basis. We moved away from that because at the end of the day, like there's too many business exceptions and things going on out there that people are just accepting as like, it looks like you're doing pretty well if you have over 90% implementation. Right. But it's like, are you? Is every single system you have just like got a gap and like tons of wide open apertures that aren't being handled? And we kept picking metrics that would make people grapple with the hardest challenges, and then we just picked on them. And there's plenty of others, just tracking things like EDR implementations, but also intentionally picking things. For example, another good proxy was something that's really important to us is like, are our agencies assessing risk as their adversaries are assessing their risk? Okay, like the outside in look. I mean, we all know that, but are your metrics like telling you whether or not they're doing that? I mean, you challenge yourself on this. So we did, and we were sort of answered that with like, no, we're just sort of like watching progress of process implementation stuff. And so we started figuring out like, okay, like, well, does everyone have the VDP program stood up? And then like the next set would, the next level after that is just, okay, then what's your, how many are you getting reported? Like what's your mean closure time? Like, are you actually using these programs or not? Are you leaning into them or not? You can start to tell if you start to measure it. Like the red teaming, it's just starting with questions of like, do you have an internal red team or are you outsourcing it? Are you using them? Just all of these things. And the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities.
Yes.
I think it's a really good risk proxy. So it can't tell you everything, but if an agency is starting to, remediate those when they're discovered on a like tighter and tighter basis, you can make some assumptions and judgments about them being a good risk prioritized shop. And it's just like a proxy to that. Like it's not really giving you. Everyone says they want outcomes. They want metrics to do outcomes. Like I don't know. Has anyone seen like good outcome metrics? That's like a really hard statement. It's like we're more secure would be an outcome. It's like how do you
how you can measure that?
But I think like one below it, and this is something that Nick Polkin helped us a lot with in the thinking too. He's here in the audience, works in our team at OMB. It's just like, but you can get to like the right below level of finding things that are kind of like 90% telling you something about where the org's headed. And I would just tell you, like, it's funny, for a lesson for us was like, you have to keep the stuff that shows everybody, like, we're going up a little bit every quarter, Okay, just like a warning, like I tried taking some of that stuff away, that did not work. Some people like can't handle that. So keep doing that and find a way to really get after whether or not your culture, your security operations centers, your infrastructure teams, your ops teams are changing their mindset. You asked about collective defense. I mean, listen, you know, that's kind of everything in our strategy largely.
True.
I mean, if you look at the national cyber strategy, you look at events like Ukraine, the way this country came together in the partnering that we did to kind of really protect critical infrastructure, which we were really, truly concerned about. And I think the problem is like we're going to have to be concerned about U.S. domestic infrastructure being a target of opportunity in every conflict we face forward. Okay. So that's like new reality.
True.
And how you're dealing with that, they have to be through partnering.
Yeah.
And CISA needs to be our backstop. And you think about DHS CISA, it's got lots of roles, but let's just dive into their role for being a backstop to federal agencies, because it's kind of a unique thing, right? Like anybody can go spend money on an MSSP to be their backstop overnight, or even during the day, whatever your security model is for your security operations center. Yeah, CISA is so much more than that to all the federal agencies. Like we're one big attack target in .gov, right? And especially like federal. And so we find every time almost that it's never just one agency that's getting targeted with something, ever, right? And its question is like, how many are getting hit at that same time? How many are exposed to that vulnerability that's being exploited, right? And those are the questions that we've started answering really fast because of CISA. Like CISA has lots of roles. I want to be super clear, right? Reporters, they have lots of roles. One of them, though, is the government's MSSP.
Yes.
It's the government backstop. It's the way that we're going to connect those dots fast because we're allowed to.
Yeah.
And it's something that a lot of organizations aren't allowed to. When I was Chief Security Officer of the State of Michigan, we had centralized IT. I had 25 agencies consolidated. And so my SOC was, you know, we had like 2 networks, but mainly one. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I could protect all of them the same way. But that took years and like a lot of culture change and legal changes, you know, in statute to be able to get to that. And like the U.S. government, we don't have that. No. We are, you know, just sitting in the DOE.
A loose federation.
Oh my goodness, the Department of Energy. It's like, who do you work for? You know, labs, right? I mean, you may get 5 different answers to those questions. Yeah. I'm sure I'm not going to make you answer that, but like, and so when you're in that world, we can at least use this approach with CISA.
Yeah. So a couple things that I was thinking of as you were talking is this whole notion of are we prioritizing our risks right? It's one of the things that we have been working on in NNSA and working with CSER, DOE CSER, which is really the energy end of the infrastructure, the electric grid end in particular. How do we look at a system, break down its vulnerabilities, but not look at it from, in many ways when we think about red teaming, et cetera, we always think about from the adversary end, right? But if you turn the lens a little bit, Chris, and you look at it from, these are the things I want to stop. These are the things I never want to happen in my system. Then you prioritize the vulnerabilities that would lead you to those bad outcomes. It seems like it's becoming a better way to think through some of the risk from a different angle, rather than starting up from, oh, these are the N ways the adversary can attack us, rather these are the less than N things we never want to have happen to our system. And so for that, we can work with our asset owners, with the regulators, all of that to help sort of build in some of these very fundamental principles that you're talking about by taking off the table certain critical assets in a systematic way, right? Starting to protect at the pointy end of the stick in a very deliberate way. So yeah, we've been working with CISA on this risk methodology for a while, and now we brought it over to the electric grid side. Yeah.
That's exciting. I've heard a little bit about that, but I completely agree with you. That's the right way to be thinking about it. And again, though, also it takes a lot of work to think about interdependency analysis and like, it's like what matters most to you? What are your lights out systems like? Are you getting that right and challenging yourself in that? Because like a lot of the lists people have, they're based on like uptime or something like that, and people think that they have one of these like high value prioritized lists,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
like, have you thought about the interest of a system or a database to an adversary in the right way? Have you challenged yourself to ensure you're doing that, right?
Yes.
And if you haven't, like, you know, you may not have the right list. And also just things, teams are building apps so fast, they're creating kind of new high risk
Yeah.
targets especially in large environments constantly. And it's like, do you have a program where you're systematically and constantly kind of reviewing and understanding all of those new risks that your teams are bringing in?
Yeah.
And I don't, you know, I mean, so it's just a continuous like live thing. But I think a lot of times people think they have a list and it's a point in time and they sort of know.
Yeah.
And I just see time and again that that's just not right.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in this audience think it's a one and done. It's
Yeah.
this continuous. And, you know, again, for me, these parallels are beginning to be more and more stark, and maybe this is a part of the security world that we might lean into a little bit more deeply, is the nuclear world, where essentially deterrence you can get two ways, right? Cost imposition, how much can you inflict on your enemy, and how much harder can you make it for them, right? So cost imposition writ large. And I'm thinking that's kind of where we're headed, right? We're thinking about how we can make it harder and harder and harder to penetrate our systems and impose more and more cost on those who would seek to thwart us.
For sure, and like this is where technology does come back in, and it's not all just people process.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because I completely agree with you, and it's also back to the point of like us taking a 3-year approach with our strategies. Like, we don't want people just staring at these things that we've asked them to do forever.
Right.
You know, it's like we'll cut and we'll see how
start.
well we did, and we'll see what we need to work on there, and check where technology's new approaches maybe people are coming up with stuff where we got it wrong, and you can stop attacks in a different type of way, in a different mindset.
Right.
And I do hear that, especially places like this, and I'm sure you all too, you know, as you're out and about, just like learning about some of the emerging, you know, approaches. But again, it takes a while for the emerging approach to like get commercialized and then sort of utilized everywhere. And so we kind of like have to be in this world of sort of like, that sounds great, but also my world and my reality is 95% like legacy mindset still.
Yeah, it's about the security culture, right? Building,
Totally.
thinking about security by design right off the bat.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to bolt stuff on back down the line.
By design, by default. I mean,
Yeah.
CISA's got huge leadership in that, and I know like you all partner with them on some things.
Yes, definitely. So CISA, DOE, CSER, and NSA, of course, being stewards of the nuclear deterrent, we definitely have to think through all these cybersecurity elements as well. And whether it's software bill of materials or software assurance or working with binaries, not just source code, right? So we have a lot of good R&D in the mix that I think will support and undergird this agenda. What we also offer, being a federally funded research and development center, and you see that across 16, actually all 17 of the DOE national laboratories, is we do a lot of R&D in spaces and offer up our trusted agent status to the government. So if you want to pilot stuff, if you want to build test beds, we can do that with you. We can actually isolate, build little microgrids, for example, isolate them, bring in sort of all the edge devices, and see what we would do by virtue of your red teaming, like literally assault the systems, see if they can recover, how can they recover, how do you do black start restarts and things like that. Yeah. So we're working through all of this, not just with the government, but also with asset owners. Yeah. Because I think very many times some of the things that a CISO might bring up to the front office is eats into revenues, right? And so enabling them to demonstrate the value of the technologies, the fixes that they are trying to put in place, we're happy to work with them to help provide them that data, give them that experimental basis to take back to argue for support for this national zero trust future.
Totally, and we're trying to do our part in government by like, eating our own dog food and like leading with this. So you look at the national cyber strategy is a huge focus on secure design principles and trying to use government buying power to make change. I mean, you could look at one thing that we recently put out, and maybe people are tracking this or not, it stems back from the EO. It just took us a while to get here. But we just released live a requirement for any software vendor that's selling to the US government has to sign a attestation form now, their CEO or delegate, that is binding to the company, saying that they're following NIST's secure software development practices. That's not nothing. I mean, one can say, oh, well, you gotta do third-party auditing of that to really know. It's like, we'll get there. We'll get there. But like, trust me, like companies are taking that seriously. Like that's like a senior executive that's binding that company to saying that they're following these practices. That means inside these companies, both the councils and the compliance teams and the engineers are having to come together and assess. And we do know a lot of companies over the past couple of years have been taking it seriously and ensuring that they can say that they are. And like, because you think about it, it's kind of a problem if you're like a big company, you're not signing that form, but everybody else is. Like, this stuff does work. It's not the full answer, but these are it's just one way that government, U.S. government, can actually start to shift and move global corporate decision making.
Yeah.
And it's like you see it time and again in various approaches that we've taken in administration over the years. And it's like not always popular, but yeah. I think it goes back to that moment that I was describing of like just palpable concern for the state of affairs we're finding ourselves in. Of like, if we can't trust anything, what are we doing? Like how do we operate in that world? And we can't. And so like that's just, you know what I mean? So like we've got to figure this out. And it really, really is why you see this huge focus on secure design, secure by default. Like I really think it's the answer.
No, I 100% agree with you. And part of the, as you were talking, I started thinking about this whole supply chain, the software supply chain is a good section in the EO about it and how you deal with legacy systems and legacy software and how you deal with software in the future. There is a large sort of a transition sort of an inflection moment. Some things we over time we will stop using. Some things we will at scale and automated be able to bring into place. Some software bills of materials, easy for me to say. I'm just going to say SBOMs. But to be able to do it at scale, automated, and in a timely way, so that there is some trust built into that level of the as much as we're talking about zero trust, being able to validate what we're putting up on our. And for me, I sit in the national security world, as do you certainly, but I think about all the national security platforms that have run software. We bring in upgrades all the time. How will we validate that we're doing the right thing? It will have to be at quite a scale, and I'm heartened to see that there is federal investment in the R&D to bring tools and resources to bear on that regard. Where do you think the sort of the SBOM future lies, Chris?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really important concept. I think that both companies, like producers, are making good progress in figuring out how to produce these things. I mean, the real trick is like, how do you use it to enable some outcome like better vulnerability management and risk prioritized vulnerability management? So, like to your point about automation, this thing comes together when all of that's automated, because like a 10,000 page PDF listing out every sort of like potential type of vulnerability that could be exploited, but that's not actually what it's saying. Like, how useful is that, right? So that's not.
That's where you use AI, Chris.
Well, right, and so we will be there soon, I think, where like once we operationalize the SBOM into security programs and like into other pieces of the program, because it could actually be used for more than just vulnerability management, of course. Yeah, I mean these concepts are fantastic, and I think a lot of really good work's gone into developing and maturing them.
Yeah, certainly we in the National Laboratory System, we are focused not just on protecting our systems, but again, electric grid, thinking through. So today we have all this critical infrastructure. thinking about the grid, the largest machine in the country, all sort of running through a central node, right, for control. That doesn't seem like a very resilient system. So how can we sort of rethink decision making on a system that way, move decision making all the way out to the edge devices, use a little bit of that computational power where all the edge devices weigh in on any particular instruction, making it so that the adversary, now again making their calculus more difficult, has to compromise over 50% of the edge devices, which are heterogeneous, making it even further complicated for them before they can take down a whole grid. Yep. And then if they were to be able to take down a grid anyway, could those grids reform in microgrid form and restart, right? So this notion of an immune infrastructure, kind of like the way the human body works, understanding those networks, keeping the adversary out. Once they get in, detect and respond, and then operate through compromise. All that sort of begins with a sound cybersecurity culture right off the bat.
100%. I love you brought up the immune system analogy, because it's one that I think a lot of us have been talking about or been interested in for at least 14, 15 years ago. I started hearing people kind of describing where we could head in that way. And it's just pretty cool that we are getting into a place with all the technology developments, in particular what we've seen over the last year or so. It's like, oh yeah, like we may actually get there.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And I mean, but we have to, because the technology on the flip side is going to create just the pace of weaponization of vulns now. It's just like, I remember back when you could be like, you had a few days.
No.
It's like, so we learned about that. Assess our exposure. It's like, but in general, things weren't being weaponized immediately. And I remember just doing the Log4j review that we did. I sit in the cyber safety review board, right? And so one of the reviews we do is Log4j event. It's like, we had all these people come through. We interviewed like 80 companies, I think, something crazy. And a lot of them just came in and showed us data. They just showed us all of the data. Like we met with everybody. So like we just got to see what happened actually. It's fascinating. It's really cool to be a board member. And but it was scary. I mean, like the time to successful weaponization implementation of that in the wild was fast. It was fast. And it was a bit jarring, I think, for most of the board members who've been in the space for a while, kind of going whoa, yikes, we'd assumed that it wasn't gonna be that sharp. And then once it's just boom, hockey stick, boom, popped, fast, like hours, popped. That's where we're at, folks. That's where we're living. And we do need the tech to save us, and we got to convince the people to use the technology. Right?
There's that. There's that.
So I don't know. That's kind of where we live.
Yeah, I have a feeling though. So in the National Laboratory System, today more than 50% of us have been in the system less than 5 years, which is an incredible generational shift. And I'd like to believe that generational shift brings with it so much innate sense of cyber systems, cyber security. I'd like to believe that we have a shot at building a whole new culture based on a whole new workforce generation that's coming in very fluent in these concepts. So I think there's some hope there in that culture element. But you're right. Everything begins with every one of us elementally having the right mindset.
But we completely agree with that, and I'm excited that the administration is really living that principle, because we've been talking about for a while, we don't need to be so boxy in that we have to require 4-year degrees for every government position. And if you've been watching the past week, we've made some pretty big announcements where, Office of Personnel Management, for governments, we're really breaking down the barrier. And we're going to be implementing just skills-based hiring for all of what we call 2210 positions, which is the main, that's a very, if you're a government, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's that's our main position description billet for an IT hire. And cyber hires are run off of it, all sorts of subs off of that. But that's the golden ticket if you're going to pick one. And we're going to figure out, I'm not saying we're there today, we'll acknowledge that, because you have to figure out a consistent, repeatable, measurable way to do skills-based assessments, to have a functional system around that, with some flex. But it's exciting that we're going. We're moving, and it's we rip the Band-Aid off, and we're going to be doing that. And the agencies, instead of sort of proving that you didn't need a degree kind of have to prove that you do. You think about that. It's like that's a big mentality shift for folks who are like in HR putting out a PD. Like the risk averse thing, which is often the path that government takes, is like just require it because like no one's ever challenged the 4-year degree requirements. Like you're not going to have a problem. As soon as you say, oh, it's just skills, you don't need the 4-year degree, somebody might challenge that, and now you have a problem. So what do? You just make it easy on yourself and you put the thing in, and we're just trying to like make it really, really hard to do that and make that the exception to the rule. It'll be a little bit of a journey, but I think for all organizations, you should pay attention to what we're doing, because like this is when government can lead and help you change your culture, your organization too, if you're having similar challenge or problem. Because when we decide to do something, it takes us a while to do that sometimes, but we do move, and then it's pretty hard to turn it back, and we do eventually get to a new outcome and a new way of doing that can be just lifted, and it's free good. I mean, like all our strategies, all of our thoughts, all the things, we are trying to make them public goods. You know, that's our goal. And I know, like, you know, a lot of the states, again, former state person, like, you're often sitting there watching, and you're just like, anything good up there coming down that I can just like plop in here, you know, my friend, you know, it's because it's super helpful to just be like, I don't know, the federal government's doing it, it's probably pretty vetted. It's like, yeah, it is, definitely pretty vetted. Like we don't do anything that's not pretty vetted.
No, that's
true. Sometimes I'm like, it's too vetted, you know?
Yes,
but like,
sometimes it takes a long time.
We don't have the like, it hasn't been thought through problem if we've stamped it. True. And that's pretty good, you know? I mean, it can be people's like gold standard to make change.
Yeah. So you used a word in there in a couple minutes ago that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's risk. Mm-hmm. It's taking risk, not just managing risk, but actually learning how to embrace meaningful risk, moving the frontier a little bit on that. And it is actually really, really heartening to know that the government is willing to open its aperture to taking a risk in its hiring processes, because we do need a lot of good talent. I know every time I look it up, this federal government is hiring people with skills of this area in large. The interest never wanes, and of course, where we are sitting right now, and where we live in the Silicon Valley, people with these talents are easily employable. So that sort of comes around to being this whole community thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we've been talking about, is building a community. So with the little time we have left, would you like to sort of energize us, give us our call to action, and I think the sense of urgency, this is not the crowd you have to convince. I think we are bought in here. We are bought in.
I've seen lots of nodding heads throughout, you know, knowing head nods like, oh yes.
Yeah. So where would you have us go, Chris?
Well, look, I mean, it depends. I don't know where this audience, I don't know where you all work and what you do. If you work for a large resourced organization, you know, listen to our general call of action there, right? If you're in government, like you have a greater responsibility. You know, you do. And the reason is because if we don't have that mentality, we will never get there. I mean, we cannot keep putting it on the end user or on the like least resourced and say, well, here's the requirements. Why haven't you done it yet? You're doing a bad job. Nope. It's like it just doesn't work. And in the national strategy, we like hard pivoted away from saying like we're giving up on that. Like we are going to go hard on making sure that the most resourced are doing everything that they can and should. And where we can't require that, we're going to pressure that. I think it's appropriate because folks, like, we got to save ourselves a little bit. And like the fact that like tech is just keep flying out the door with no passwords, you know, it's inappropriate. Like that, like, you know, to say it's like, well, there's too much customer friction introduced. To keep saying that in 2024, it's like you're wrong. You know, like that's wrong. And you even see some governments in other countries taking action against that stuff. And I think that's it's like, take it seriously, like not just the sort of, these aren't requirements for requirements' sake. Like everything we're trying to do is just like change the kind of business culture everywhere. And also we're taking a huge inward look at ourselves, because like, the US government has to change its way of doing as well, like absolutely. And I think in no way, shape, or form are we saying it's just like, oh, you need to do, it's like a huge part of that And so if you work for government, and you're sitting in the audience too, it's like, really think about how you can help your organization take some of the risks that it needs to take and get the technical assistance and phone a friend. And like, because a lot of this collective action thing is really working. Like we have DHS and others with resources and skills and capabilities, and we can pull in people who've been through kind of like, you know, implementing like FIDO2 tech on mainframes, just like whatever, right? Like hard things that's like, if you haven't done it before, it's pretty intimidating, you're probably not gonna do it on your own. Okay, but like, then get help. I think that's the call to action. It's just like, don't let excuses drive, and don't let business exceptions drive the status quo anymore. Like please really don't. Because like we have to be the people that push.
Yeah.
You know, because it's just like the business leaders are going to continue to be focused on business problems and business outcomes and revenue and things. Okay? But we have the responsibility to ensure that they're thinking about their risks that they're accepting, whether they're a government agency, a cabinet secretary, you know, are they making the right risk acceptance decisions? Like, maybe not, because we haven't given them enough right type of information, not data, not numbers and charts for the things that they don't understand, but like information about what risks they're accepting by not making the changes that we need. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's like.
No, that's totally true. And as somebody who is not fluent in this world, language-wise, I really appreciate when somebody comes to me and explains to me what the risk is in terms that I can actually understand, not just
which is hard, but that's the responsibility.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because we can't just keep saying like understand us and get frustrated when people don't listen. It's like we have to stop doing that.
Yes. No,
it won't be easy.
It won't be easy, but if it were easy, it would have already been done.
It would have been done, right?
Yep. So, Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
I know I'm not in government anymore, but it gives me great heart to know that you are. People like you continue to fight the good fight and move the needle where the nation is going. So, thank you for your service and thank you for this time together.
Yeah, thank
It's
you
been
very much.
amazing.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.